Hello and welcome back to the Scot Goes Popcast. My name is James Kelly, and for episode 11 of the podcast, I'm joined once again by the journalist, author and anti-war activist, Dr. Yvonne Ridley, who now lives in the Scottish borders and is a great supporter of independence. Famously, though, she was a prisoner of the Taliban just after the September the 11th bombings 20 years ago. Yvonne was the very first guest on the podcast at the start of the year, and at that time I was asking questions about the Taliban very much in the past tense. I don't think I could possibly have imagined that they'd be back in total control of Afghanistan within only a few months. So Yvonne, I'm just wondering what your emotions were when you saw Kabul falling to the Taliban so rapidly.
Well, it wasn't so much a fall, was it? It was a bit of a non-event. They sort of said, "Can we come in?" and arrived in what was almost a bloodless coup. Yeah. In fact, the handover was more peaceful than the handover between Biden and Trump in Washington. You know, when hundreds of police were injured and 5 or 6 people were killed. So. Yes, it didn't actually come as a surprise to me. They were never going to go away. They have been fighting to get back for 20 years. And while they've been fighting to get back, they've sort of I'm trying to find the right word, that they've sort of built up a network of contacts across Afghanistan. And in the south, they've been running a parallel government in all but name.
So is this the same Taliban that was in power before 2001, or have they changed? And if they have changed, how fundamentally have they changed?
It is the same in some ways. Some of the founders have survived and are still with the leadership, and they won't compromise on their ideology, their religion, but they have softened around the edges, and they're much more approachable, more media savvy. And much more mature. I would say that they probably are in a position to govern now, and it doesn't do anybody any service by sitting calling them brutal, primitive, medieval, because hey, they've just had a victory over the biggest superpower in the world. You know, these fighters in sandals and shalwar kameez. So that's quite an achievement. And now they're ready to govern, and people are horrified. But it didn't just happen. It's been 20 years in the planning.
To what extent is it really an achievement, though? Because the Americans have essentially just walked away. You know, Biden talked about how the Afghans didn't have the will to fight, but is it not really that the Americans didn't have the will anymore, and they are the superpower, and if the will had been there, they could have quite easily defeated the Taliban?
I was speaking to a military strategist about this, and for America to have defeated the Taliban would have required an investment of 100,000 troops. I think 60,000 went into Iraq. So the Americans would have needed 100,000 troops on the ground. And then you're not fighting, it's a guerrilla war. And they beat the Russians, the Mujahideen, you know, these same sort of fighters in their flip-flops and shalwar kameez. It was a triumph, whichever way you look at it, because America went through 4 presidents, $3 trillion to get rid of the Taliban, to replace them with the Taliban. And this Taliban, courtesy of the Americans, now have their own air force. They didn't have an air force before, but they do now, and they've got an army of 300,000 soldiers, and they've got a fleet of Black Hawk helicopters that very few dictators in the region have got. So, you know, they've done pretty well.
I mean, it is like the last 20 years, it was almost like a complete waste of time. But you know, obviously people like Tony Blair have been making the point that sacrifice of British troops was not in vain, because a generation has grown up in relative freedom in Afghanistan, and maybe lots of thousands of people have been to university that maybe otherwise wouldn't have gone, particularly women. Do you think there's a grain of truth in that, or is it sort of Tony Blair trying to salvage desperately what's left of his legacy?
Well, an element of both. I mean, it would be churlish to admit that there weren't some green shoots of hope. Without doubt, some women have fared off quite well. You know, there've been judges, journalists, teachers, doctors. Some women have done quite well, but these are mainly the privileged elite of Kabul and the major cities. I've been back a few times, and, you know, I have working class roots. And so that's where I gravitate to when I go to Afghanistan. And because I'm a woman, I can get access to women, unlike male journalists. And the story outside of the cities it's not a pretty picture. There are still some areas where schools do not exist. There are other areas in Kandahar where they've got these super duper new schools and no teachers. So, you know, no teachers, no pupils, no learning. Because of the instability in the country, there are about 10 million kids that aren't getting a structured education. And even, you know, through COVID, kids are learning online, not in Afghanistan, because I think it's only about 20% of the country has connectivity. It's, you know, it's worse than it is in the Scottish borders.
Well,
and so, yeah, that'll give you an indication. And 84% of Afghan women still can't read and write. So, you know, not the success story that Tony Blair might want to claim. In fact, when it comes to women's rights, the bar is very, very low. And I have listened to a few Afghan women who are going, oh, that's our women's rights have gone. We're going to go back to the Stone Age. It's like, hang on. They weren't that high in the first place. And what about the sisterhood? What about the women in the rural areas who haven't got a voice, who actually will welcome the Taliban coming back? And you know, it's a bit of a class war in a lot of ways as well. It's quite interesting. I mean, the previous government, the Ashraf Ghani government, was really corrupt, one of the most corrupt governments in the world. And the rich got richer and the poor got nothing, you know, same old story. The Taliban are saying the right things, but of course, these are just words. So let's see those words turn into deeds, and let's see something real happen.
Yeah, I mean, the Taliban have made very general, vague commitments to, you know, respect and uphold the rights of women. Is it naive to think there's any trust can be placed in that at all?
Well, I think that what else is there? You know, the Taliban have have been very truthful, even when the truth has been quite repugnant. But they have been truthful in the past. So there's no reason not to trust them at the moment. But if they are lying, they've been given a second chance. And if they are lying to the Afghan people, then they'll never be forgiven.
Yeah, I saw that on Twitter. You were presenting the case for Afghan women to stay in Afghanistan. And you're almost saying it was relatively safe for them to do so. But it's a big dilemma for individuals, isn't it? Because if they sort of guess wrong or make the wrong judgment, they could be trapped for the rest of their lives in a very dark place.
Well, I was speaking to one remarkable Afghan woman who had fled as a child from the country, and she had ended up in Canada and was living a relatively good life in Canada. And then she decided she wanted to go back to her roots, and she moved back to Kabul in 2018, 2019. And when the Taliban arrived on the outskirts of Kabul, all of her friends rang her up, from Canada, saying, "Get the hell out, the Taliban are on the doorstep."
Yeah.
Her friends in Kabul were going, "Oh, quick, we've got to go, we've got to run." And she said, "I'm not running. I'm not running. I'm done with running. I'm not going to go back to a country where I'm going to be treated like a second-class citizen, because I'll never be accepted because I'm different." And so she said, "I'm staying put." And her family in Canada were furious with her, but she just said that she wasn't going to run. So as we were talking, she said she'd started a hashtag campaign saying, "Please stay." And she was trying to persuade others to do the same. And yes, she was scared, because, she doesn't know what the future is going to hold. But she said, there has to come a point where you stop running. And she said, "And I'm just not going anywhere." And then she said, "Oh, I'm off to the beauty parlor." And I said, "Well, I thought they'd all closed." She went, "No, of course they haven't."
Well, not yet, though. Yeah.
Well, not yet. Actually, it would be a very brave Taliban soldier that would come between a woman and her curling tongs. So my money's on the women of Kabul and their beauty salons. So she said she was going off to the beauty salon, and that there was a big wedding party, 200 people, and she was going to that. And I said, "Are you going out at all?" And she said, "I've been out in the streets, I've been driving, and I've seen the Taliban." And she said, "I don't feel frightened." So, we said we'd keep in touch, and hopefully we'll get more of a picture about what is really happening on the ground. I mean, there's a lot of hoax news and false news as well, and it's really trying to sort of work through it and try and it's not that easy, because the media have demonized the Taliban for the last 20 years, so they can't turn around now and say, "Oh, they're good guys, really." So they've got to keep on with the demonization. But one thing is for sure, the Americans and the Brits and the rest of the NATO forces would not have been able to have such a smooth running emergency evacuation without the Taliban covering their backs.
Yeah.
And that was something that the head of the American military was quite gracious about, because out of necessity, they've had to collaborate with the Taliban.
Uh-huh.
Although, you know, they were sworn enemies just a few weeks ago.
One of the notorious incidents that sort of summed up the Taliban's pariah status prior to the 2001 overthrow was the destruction of the huge Buddha statues, which were a UNESCO World Heritage Site, was totally destroyed. Do you have fears for, I mean, it's less important than people, obviously, but do you have fears for Afghanistan's cultural heritage in that way going forward?
No, and I'll tell you why. When I was held by the Taliban, I asked them, you know, why did you destroy the Bamyan Buddhas? There are thousands there, by the way, but these particular ones were the really big giant ones that they destroyed. And they said that the country was isolated, they weren't getting any aid, they weren't getting any help, they'd been ostracized by virtually the entire world. There was a famine which had afflicted half of the country, and the people were having to dig through snow just to eat blades of grass to survive. And they said it was really a terrible time. And somebody had mentioned in passing, those worthless Bamyan Buddhas, and suddenly the whole world came to a screeching halt. And as you've just pointed out, UNESCO World Heritage Site, all these academics, architects, historians, Buddhists, you know, came tumbling in from all corners of the world and bombarded the Taliban with letters saying, you can't do this, we must protect. And their attitude was, gosh, all of this fuss over those statues, and yet nothing about the millions that are on the brink of starvation. Well, if they want rocks, they can have them. And they blew up the Buddhas. Now then, it was an act of cultural vandalism.
Yeah.
It was an act of petulance, and it was the act of, I think, a very immature government. I don't think it would happen again. I can't see them. It wasn't done for religious reasons at all. It was done out of anger more than anything else, because people were starving to death.
So that Taliban government, had very little international recognition. I think only Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, maybe one or two other countries recognized.
The United Arab Emirates they had 3 countries that recognized them. At the moment, they've got none.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's going to be even worse this time. Is there any way that countries can even deal with the Taliban as if it was a normal government of a state?
Yes, they will. I mean, at the moment, they can't recognize them because there isn't a government or any sort of functioning administration. I think they are working that out and will unveil whatever they see as a working government. And I don't think it will be a democracy. I don't think it will be a dictatorship. It'll be interesting to see what they come up with, because in Afghanistan's culture, they have these things called lawyer jirgas, where all the tribal elders of different areas come together, and it's a bit of a talking shop. What they have said is whatever they do, it will be inclusive. So it will include women, it will include the Hazara, Tajiks, Uzbeks, all of the ethnic minority groups in Afghanistan, which again is a sign of their maturity, because they wouldn't have anyone in their ranks the last time. So that's going to be interesting. Once that happens, we'll see if the world community will step forward. I have a feeling they will, because the Taliban have already had tentative trade talks with their neighbors in Pakistan, Iran, China, Russia, Turkey. Obviously, Qatar is in the mix because it hosted the peace conference that enabled America and Afghanistan, or the Taliban, to sign a peace treaty last February. So I think that they've got quite a few things in place, and I think that we'll be surprised again. You know, as I keep saying, they're not primitive and medieval. They're different. They're not like us. They probably wouldn't want to be like us. And you know, they will go their own way, but it's don't underestimate them.
Yeah. Do you think that America's hasty retreat, marks the end of Western liberal interventionism, this idea that you can sort of liberate people by invading their countries or occupying their countries, and that you can sort of impose so-called freedom and democracy at the point of a gun? Is that coming to an end now?
I think so. I think we're witnessing the beginning of the end of the American empire as we've known it. And I also think that their confidence has been shattered by their foreign policy or meddling in the Middle East and Asia. It's come back to bite them. And I think psychologically, they're very much damaged. I can't see them entering into any major conflict now for at least another 10 to 15 years.
Unless, of course, there was another 9/11 type incident, in which case the whole situation might be turned on its head again, presumably.
Well, I think if, God forbid, something like that were to happen, I think they'd just send over their drones and knock out a few points and come back again. I just don't think they've got the stomach to put boots on the ground again.
Okay, so shall we go on and talk about the political situation in Scotland now? Oh dear. Oh, perhaps not. Well, all right. Well, the big development recently, of course, has been the deal between the SNP government and the Green Party, with two Green ministers. I think they've been approved by the Scottish Parliament today. So, are you excited about this deal? I think as a left winger, you must presumably be happy to see the Scottish government being sort of tugged to the left a bit by the Greens.
I just want to see the Scottish government start doing what it was elected to do, which is deliver independence. And I'm so fed up now with the shenanigans in Holyrood that I think that it's time the Scottish people stood up and just started moving for independence through movements like All Under One Banner. People movements will get us independence. The Scottish government in its current form, doesn't matter how many green bells and whistles it has in its makeup, that isn't going to get us independence. And I just, you know, I went through the whole of North Africa during the Arab Spring, and I saw countries rise up and dictators being toppled and people movements doing amazing things. And I was just thinking about this the other day, and I thought, we're doing this all wrong in Scotland. You know, we get up, we go on a march, whether it's All Under One Banner or just another independence march, and impressive numbers always, and everybody has a good march, a good day out, and right, see you at the next march, and we go back home. We shouldn't go back home. We should continue marching. We should continue rallying, and we should find our the equivalent of Tahrir Square in Scotland and stay there, and just stay until the Scottish government delivers on its promise. Maybe we should form a camp outside Holyrood. There's plenty of grass, and just rally and stay there and not go home until they deliver on their promises. We're doing it all wrong. We're too nice. You know, we need to protest and stay and not move until the Scottish government delivers. And it's no use blaming Westminster. We know where the obfuscation has been, and it's in Holyrood.
I think there's this big division that's opened up in the independence movement, because I know a lot of people would listen to what you've just said and think it was completely ridiculous, because they're focused on the idea of winning a referendum that is about to take place. And they say, what are you doing? Attacking the Scottish government, which has been elected and will hold the referendum. Why would you be campaigning against them rather than just getting out there and winning independence? I mean, I agree with you.
It's not campaigning against them as such. It's giving them a gentle nudge and telling them, or maybe not so gentle, and telling them, you know, get on with it, do something. And if you can't do it, get out of the way and let somebody in who can.
Well, they won't do that, will they? Because, you know, they
well,
are.
No, but you know, it took less than, I think it was 20 days for the Egyptian people to get more than 1 million people in Tahrir Square in Cairo. And we could do something like that get a few 100,000. And Police Scotland, you know, don't have, well, I don't think they would use guns for crowd control in the way that the Cairo police did, and tear gas and all that sort of nonsense. So, you know, it would be quite doable. And I think that if the Scottish government continues to drag its heels the way it's been doing so, that's what we should do. We should get out and march and not go home.
But I mean, I broadly agree with your assessment of the Scottish government, but obviously we've just had an election in which the SNP got a resounding mandate, and, you know, the Alpa party, which is probably closer to the views you've been expressing, got a trivial amount of votes. So is there really any evidence that we could get hundreds of thousands of people out to push the Scottish government as opposed to just generically supporting independence?
These things need building on, and it just needs a little trigger, and suddenly you get amazing people's movements. You know, you look at the shipyard workers who refused to go home in Poland and gave, oh, you're probably too young to remember Lech Walesa and
I do remember Lech Walesa.
Well, and his big handlebar mustache. And, you know, they just went on strike and just refused to go home. And out of that, the Solidarity movement was born. In Berlin, the wall came down and people just kept chipping and picking away at it. And it was people power, not politicians, that brought down the wall. And the same with the Arab Spring. Tunisia is probably the main success story now out of the Arab Spring, but they've got their democracy, they've got their elections, they got rid of the tyrant Ben Ali, and Libya got rid of Gaddafi, and the Egyptians got rid of Ehud Mubarak. Unfortunately, they've now got another tyrant in their place in Sisi. But for a wonderful moment, the Arab people rose up and took control. And if we can't trust our politicians to deliver independence, we're going to have to do it ourselves.
I think also unionists would listen to what you've just said, and they would say it was ridiculous because we do not live in a dictatorship. We don't have a communist government. We don't have a dictator. What is this terrible tyranny that we would be rising up against?
Well, Boris Johnson, for a start, and his far-right Tories, they're destroying the country. It's like watching somebody drill a hole in the bottom of a ship. How big are we going to let that hole become before we start saying, whoa, we've got to act on it. Even the unionists are concerned about Boris Johnson. The fishing industry's wrecked. Sheep farmers are beginning to realise they've been screwed over as well. Farmers in general are beginning to realise, Brexit has done nobody any favours, certainly not in Scotland. And, I think that there must be some unionists who are harbouring doubts in deep down. It will surface eventually.
One thing that's interesting about this SNP Green Deal is that people like us are sort of maybe a bit skeptical about it, or more than skeptical, and thinking that it's a way of kicking independence into the long grass, maybe focusing on other preoccupations like the Gender Recognition Act and so on. But from a unionist point of view, and you see this in the newspapers and unionist commentators, to them it seems absolutely obvious that Nicola Sturgeon only cares about independence and nothing else, and that this deal must be some kind of cynical master plan to drive through independence against the Scottish people's wishes. So there's this huge sort of gulf of perception. Do you think can you see it from the other point of view? Could you see this deal as somehow being about independence, bringing independence forward?
No, I don't see that at all. I just think it's more obfuscation and prevarication. It's just I can't remember Patrick Harvey ever making any really stirring speeches that would gird the loins, that would make you want to think, yes, he's an unpleasant little man who has issues with women. Doesn't inspire me at all. That's my view, and that's how I feel towards him. And so I think that this has just been a sideshow, just a distraction. It's not going to get us closer to independence. Everything that Nicola Sturgeon should be doing now should be geared towards getting us closer to independence. And I put out a tweet a few weeks ago to her, and I was a big fan of hers, and said, do you really want to become known as the woman who cost us independence? Because I genuinely fear that that's what is going to happen. And I know that people will say, oh gosh, why we're listening to this English woman. Technically, I'm not English, I'm a Geordie, but I sold up and invested in Scotland. I moved to Scotland, and because of independence, I really wanted to happen. And I know, when I moved up here in 2011, that it wasn't going to happen overnight. But I just see it going further away now.
From a tactical perspective, obviously the SNP fell exactly 1 seat short of the majority in May. With the Greens, there's a clear pro-independence majority. The government has a majority, although there's this sort of Schrodinger's coalition where you don't really know whether it's a coalition or not a coalition. But nevertheless, the government sort of now have a majority, and it's a pro-independence government. Both components of it are pro-independence. From a tactical point of view, does that not help build the pressure for a referendum by saying to Westminster, we've got an impeccable mandate?
I don't think it does. And I just, I can't see what difference it's going to make towards Westminster. And the reality is, let's face it, if Sturgeon went to Westminster demanding a referendum, the Greens would be on board anyway.
Yeah.
So it hasn't made a difference. All we've got, as I say, is this rather unpleasant little man who has issues with women.
Okay, so obviously you've said that everything Nicola Sturgeon does, everything the Scottish government does, should be geared towards their primary goal of independence. But,
yeah,
independence is not the only thing you care about either. I mean, looking at the other parts of the deal, I mean, are you pleased in some ways about the deal? I mean, there must be some things that are, moving the Scottish government to the left. I mean, I know like right-wingers like Andrew Neil are having fainting fits over some of it. It's quite extraordinary.
Oh, well, I saw what Andrew wrote, and he needs to calm down and take a couple of chill pills. But I mean, he has his own issues as well. I mean, we have problems, not just in Scotland, but in the rest of Europe with the rise of the far right. And these are all things that could be sorted, but it all leads back to independence. And we need to get an independent Scotland, and then we can raise the bar in ethical foreign policy, in migration, in education, in the health service. And we can do, I think, such great things that voters in England will start to say, why aren't we getting that? And that in turn should raise the bar in England. And I keep telling my friends in England who, don't want the union to break up, I keep saying it will be the best thing for you. Because when we raise the bar, you'll have to, because it'll become so obvious that having such a corrupt government like Boris Johnson's is going to create an even bigger gap between the have and the have-nots.
What's your reaction to the part of the deal about the GRA, about GRA reform? Is that a sort of tactical maneuver to try and take it out of the hands of the SNP and to try and sort of go over their heads, to resolve the internal dispute within the SNP and just make it a foregone conclusion that this is now going to go through?
I've sat down and spoken with trans people, and without exception, and there's not that many of them, but without exception, the ones that I have spoken to have just said, what the hell is going on? They're not at all happy with all the aggression and hostility that has come out against women. And it's quite interesting. Large sections of the gay community are very upset with not the trans community, but with elements of the trans community who are causing all of this disruption. Well, there's not that many that I've spoken to, because there aren't many, but there are trans people who are really hacked off at the way that their lives have been made more difficult because of this aggressive, abrasive language used by Holyrood towards women's rights and the, the Women Won't Wish campaign. And it really is a case of the tail wagging the dog. It's just got out of all proportion. And, most, especially feminists like myself, we fought for women's rights, but not only have we fought for women's rights, we fought for equality. We don't want to be better than anybody else. We just want the same as everybody else. And when we see those very rights of ours being diminished and diluted because of some really aggressive trans men, then it's, of course, I'll be called a TERF now for these views, but I'm quite unapologetic, and I have got trans friends who are saying, if the Scottish government is so concerned about us, why don't they have the correct toilet facilities? Why don't they have the correct health facilities? Some of these trans people have been waiting 2 to 3 years before they can see a specialist to get medically assessed, to be able to move forward. And it's absolutely heartbreaking listening to the limbo that they're stuck in. And yet everybody's sidetracked on different issues around the whole GRA thing, but they're not throwing money to solve the real problems that trans people need to resolve. It's I feel very sorry for them, but there's no reason why men and women can't help promote their needs, and their needs primarily can be sorted not through legislation, but by hard cash thrown at the health service to speed up the processes they need to go through to reach their goals.
This ideology is, it's a phenomenon in the left throughout the whole sort of Western world, in Canada, the Labour Party in the UK, it's just everywhere. Where do you think it's come from? I mean, it's not like these are sort of trans activists in positions of power. It's, it's Keir Starmer or Shirley Ann Somerville or Justin Trudeau or whoever. And so why is it so important to them to take on board this ideology?
I don't know. They're very corrosive and toxic. I mean, I look at I was going to say Stonewall. Stonewall, a brilliantly heroic organization, and that has been fractured and ripped apart by these elements within who are just causing mayhem. And it's, as far as I can see, it's not women who want to become men. The real problem is being caused by men who want to become women. And once again, men are chipping away at women's rights, but nobody can see the irony that's going on here. And I could almost tear my hair out when I saw a Scottish government tweet about people who get pregnant. For God's sake, only women can get pregnant. Deal with it. It's one of those things. Yeah. Only men can get cancer of the sorry, I've got a couple of hens fighting out here, making a hell of a racket, you know, testicle cancer. So, you know, can we just be all grown up about this and get on with it and stop trying to destroy J.K. Rowling? I mean, I was never a big fan of hers after I learned that she wasn't interested in independence. But the vilification of J.K. Rowling has been absolutely outrageous.
Okay, so final question. If you were in control of the Scottish government, or if you could tell them what to do and they had to do what you told them, what strategy should they be following? How do we win our independence?
Through people power.
Okay.
You know, march on London, have the equivalent, you know, the Jarrow March is still talked about all these years on. We should have lots and lots of different campaigns, hire a train, pack it full of Scots and let's go down to London and campaign down there. It's, you know, we can't just do more of the same of what we're doing. We need to convince everybody that, you know, we're really serious about independence. But you look at the figures and the latest polls, we're starting to go back down again because people have just lost the will and just thought, gosh, if we can't even deliver on a second referendum, how can we deliver on anything? And it's all about confidence and the ability to do this.
Okay. Well, thanks for your time.
Let's have a revolution.
Okay, well, yeah. I thought you were talking about another Jacobite invasion of London. Just turned to 1745. Okay, so thanks for your time today, Yvonne. It was really great to hear your views once again.
Thank you.
So that was episode 11 of the podcast, but if everything goes to plan, I should be back with episode 12 very, very soon. Until then, keep checking the Scot Goes Pop blog for all the latest Scottish polling news and political commentary. Bye for now.